Hey guys, it's Joan Rips here, coming back with another Slay the Spire in-depth discussion. Today, I want to look at Rampage, specifically Rampage Plus, but hey, we can talk about Rampage too. They're more or less the same thing. I think this is a really interesting card for Ironclad. Ironclad has some very obvious, like, it gets lots of strength and it hits you really hard decks, and it also has some extremely powerful, it exhausts everything, and then it has 300 block and it body slams you decks. And Rampage sort of sits out there on its own as a completely different type of win condition, potentially. Now, I started the game on non-Ascension like everybody else, and I played some decks with Rampage, where Rampage was pretty much what I went with. This card deals 8 damage for 1 energy, which is decent the first time you play it. And then every time this card is played, we increase its damage by 4 for this combat if it's not upgraded, or 8 for this combat if it is upgraded. So if we played it, 4 times, now we're dealing 32 for 1 energy, and all of a sudden the enemy is dying very rapidly. This is comparable to a deck which is incrementally gaining strength of something like Demon Form, except that it's only applying to the 1 card. And so, conceptually, if we're using Rampage to win, we'd like to pair it with cards like Headbutt. Place a card from your discard pile on top of your draw pile, so we get to play Rampage more than once. We might want to pair it with something like Double Tap. Although only if we can reliably set up the double tap with the Rampage, because we probably don't want that many attacks in our deck. We probably want like block plus Rampage, that would be the sensible thing to do. And it also benefits from cards which will make our deck smaller as the fight goes on, so we can start drawing and playing Rampage more and more commonly. Something like True Grit Plus to exhaust a card in your hand gets rid of something like a defend or a strike, or even a different better card later on in the fight, so that there are fewer cards in your deck so that you're drawing Rampage more often. There are many types of targeted exhaust in Ironclad. One that I think is not particularly strong, but which I find myself using if a deck is trying to do something like this, is Burning Pact, which starts with B, which means it's here. Burning Pact gets sort of both halves of it. It exhausts a card from your deck, so you're drawing Rampage more often because your deck is smaller, and it draws you 2 cards, so you're drawing Rampage more often because you drew 2 cards. Fairly obvious, I suppose. So there is an entire deck there which can work. And something that okay, so like the first thing I did was like I worked out, okay, there's a deck there and it works, and I played it without Ascension, and it was fine. It won a decent amount of time. For a time, it was like all of my winning Ironclad decks seemed like they had Rampage in them. I hadn't worked out how the exhaust stuff worked very well yet, and I hadn't really worked out that Demon Form was an incredibly strong card. I was thinking like, oh, this is clunky and not super great, and so I was building these Ironclad decks which sort of could kill hallway fights and stuff and deal with Act 1 and 2, and then they were sort of like really petering off and not doing very well because I just wasn't building scaling into them. And Rampage was the first sort of scaling that I sort of understood and got. It's very clear how Rampage scales. At this point, I know that stuff like Demon Form, this is just incredible scaling. You just want that card in your deck. That's really, really good. I know that Limit Break is, especially when upgraded, this is incredible scaling. You definitely want that in your Ironclad deck. But I was still in a mindset where I was trying to build decks which we could like very consistently, without having any weak turns, without ever like drawing Limit Break when they hadn't gained strength from anything else or something like that. They could very consistently win. And that's something that does work somewhat on non-Ascensions, but it's not the way to optimize the power of Ironclad. As difficulty increases and you need to do more and more, and I don't think it's the way to optimize the power of Ironclad on non-Ascension either. It was just the way that I sort of got stuck with first. So Rampage was this card which I was winning with all the time, and then I started playing Ascension, and I was like, oh, here's a Rampage. I'll use my Rampage deck, and I'll build my Rampage deck, and I would get my Rampage, and I'd start taking the True Grits to exhaust the cards, and I wouldn't take the other attacks and stuff, and I wouldn't be taking strength cards, because why do you need strength when Rampage is increasing in damage over and over again? And I just fucking died every time, because it's not good. This is, if you think about it, like, okay, so we deal 8 damage. Let's say we draw it on turn 1 every time. So we deal 8 damage on turn 1, and then we deal like 16 damage on turn 4. And we deal 24 damage on like turn 6. And so we're like killing stuff on like turn 10 or something. And how do we beat hallway fights? We just don't. We just die. That was basically my experience. Like, yeah, that's basically what happens. So for a while I went off Rampage entirely. And it wasn't until even after that I worked out this card is actually quite strong, and it does have a place, but we don't want to get locked into this card as the only thing that a deck can do. What Rampage does, and it's quite good at doing it, is if we add it to our deck early on, it gives us fairly easy Act 1 Elite fights, and it gives us probably a win against the Act 1 boss, even on Ascension 15. I've lost to Hexaghost relying on Rampage, but I'm pretty sure that it's killed everything else for me every time I've tried, and it's also killed Hexaghost lots of times. Because sometimes, you don't get a demon form in Act 1, or you don't get a limit break in Act 1, or you don't get like an inflame or a spot weakness in Act 1 even, and you need something that does ramp up, and Rampage is actually a really good option there. What Rampage doesn't do, and what it's never going to do, is kill Act 2 hallway fights for you, and it's never really going to be good enough to be killing the Act 2 boss and Act 3 boss, probably, for you. Unless you can really make incredible block in your Ironclad deck, which is like... yeah, that would be impressive, and also if you can make incredible block, why are you killing them with Rampage? Like, look up the card Body Slam. It starts with deal damage equal to your current block. That's probably the card that you're looking for, if you can make that much block to be able to survive Act 3 end bosses long enough to kill them with Rampage. Anyway, so Rampage does fairly often get included in my Ironclad decks these days, and it has this very happy spot. It's, 8 damage for 1 energy isn't that bad. If that's all I get out of it in some hallway fights, that's fine. I might draw it again. I often don't bother upgrading it, because you don't really need the upgrade to deal with the Act 1 boss pretty often, so it's just like an unupgraded Rampage. And my deck's like 25, 30 cards as Ironclad, but sometimes I might draw it 2 times. Sometimes I might headbutt it on top just to deal 16 damage for 1 energy, and then it's a little bit stronger later, and it might do something great at the end of the fight. But in general, and this is something that I've found is more and more the case for Ironclad damage sources, I just don't need an attack that does everything by itself. And Rampage is a great attack for, pulling weight when it's needed, when you've got nothing better at all. And then it's just not that offensive to have in your deck the rest of the time. It's just not that bad. 8 damage for 1, then 16 damage for 1. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that in a fight. So, yeah, I think Rampage is a really interesting card. I'll look at the stats, because I think this is interesting, and I hadn't actually before I started looking at the stats. Rampage is it's actually my 14th highest ELO rating card for Ironclad. So I pick this quite commonly. I pick it 64% of the time that I see it. It is an uncommon, so you don't see it that often. And I wouldn't pick it later on in the game, probably, but I guess in this sample I saw it early on in the game quite often. But yeah, that's quite often getting picked up for me early on in the game. And it's not a card that I think is all that strong, but Rampage is a card that I think is great as just a one-of in a lot of decks. It gives you a tool to deal with fights that you might not have tools to deal with yet early on in the game, and then it's just inoffensive. I really like Rampage. It has a warm spot in my heart. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this chat. Please do leave some comments. Let me know what you think about Rampage, how you use it, what you thought about what I said. I would love to hear. And I will be back tomorrow to talk about another card or relic. Haven't decided yet. I'll hope to see you guys there. Bye.